Good evening and welcome to Kunsong Pile Joling. We're really glad to have you with us tonight, and we're also delighted to be showing a teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo. Title is Why We Need to Awaken, and it was originally taught in 1990. So, hope you enjoy it. We begin.
We have been engaged in a certain theme, and what I like to do is I like to take a certain theme and develop it in a very complete way over a period of weeks, sometimes even months. Trying to approach the subject from many different angles and also using many different kinds of formats. The subject that I have been approaching at this time is to understand the mind as the ultimate object of refuge. The mind is the ultimate guru. There's many different ways to understand that. One can understand it in a very esoteric, philosophical sense. And one can also understand it in a very simple, relative sense. That is to say, that one can understand it in such a way that one can actually apply the technology to one's life in a very simple and unassuming way. Both ends of the spectrum are valuable, and everything in between is valuable. So I try to give this teaching in a very common and ordinary way so that we can understand what we need to do tomorrow, today, right now, and also so that we can understand the implications of such a teaching in a very profound way, and so that the teaching will carry over and have great depth for us. I may then use a very ordinary, common, seemingly day-to-day experience as an example of that teaching, or I may give a nature of mind teaching, one that is very philosophical, one that is very esoteric. I try to use all of these different approaches so that when we walk away from the subject or when we go on to something else, it's almost like we've climbed a mountain, but we've done so from every possible angle, so that we really have a sense of the shape of that mountain. One can have a very limited perception if one only understands any subject in a certain limited way. It's as though one has climbed a mountain through using a certain path and thinks that the shape of the mountain is like the shape of that path. And it really isn't like that. It's much more meaningful than that. So in continuing with this theme, I would like to bring out the point that in order to establish the mind as the ultimate object of refuge, in order to establish not the common, ordinary mind that we think of as intellect, but rather the primordial wisdom nature, that pure awakened state that the Buddha spoke of when he said simply, I am awake. That state, that Buddha nature, which is our nature in truth. As the ultimate object of refuge, we should actually begin to understand for ourselves the need to achieve that awakened state. One cannot say that one really understands the primordial wisdom nature as being the ultimate object of refuge, or the awakened mind as being the ultimate object of refuge, without also saying that one wishes with all one's heart to go forward in that direction, that one wishes with all one's heart to make a commitment to awaken to that condition. to that state and to abide effortlessly and spontaneously in that state. Because if one did not make every effort to achieve the awakened state, that means every effort, then one could not possibly have established the primordial wisdom nature, or the mind, as being the ultimate object of refuge. One has not then yet understood that teaching. In order to understand the primordial wisdom nature as the ultimate object of refuge, one must also understand the obstacles to that nature. One must understand the faults, for instance, as the Buddha teaches, of cyclic existence. According to the Buddha, for those of you that are not familiar with Buddhist teaching at all, this nature, this Buddha nature, is the true face, is the true mind. It is luminous, it is free from conceptualization, it is spacious, it is free from all contrivance and limitation. It isn't the mind that we use when we balance our check account. And it isn't the mind that we use when we look in the mirror and see ourselves. And it isn't the mind that we use when we see others and put labels on them. That mind is a deluded mind, actually, because it operates on a certain foundational concept, under the influence of a certain foundational concept. That concept is the belief in the solidity of self-nature, that self-nature is inherently real. And so the mind perceives then in a dualistic way, because when one perceives self-nature as being inherently real, one must always distinguish then between self and other. That's the only way that you can hold that concept, or else that concept would be like water in a sieve. The concepts, the idea of self-nature as being inherently real would fall apart if one did not distinguish between self and other. We are then constantly operating in a dualistic fashion. That is the relative mind. That is not the mind that is the ultimate object of refuge. When I speak of the ultimate object of refuge, I think of the mind that is like the Buddha, pure, spacious, awakened, luminous, free from all contrivance. That is the nature. We must examine for ourselves in order to ascertain that enlightenment, that this awakening to that nature is what we truly want. We must ascertain for ourselves, and we must determine for ourselves what the faults are of that relative view that I've just described, that dualistic view, that limited view. That view is the view that produces what we call in Buddhism samsara, or the endless wandering in cyclic existence, death and rebirth, death and rebirth, death and rebirth. Because it is that mind that conceives of self-nature as being inherently real, and it is the self that lives and dies. It is that mind that conceives of phenomena, therefore, as also being real and solid, because of the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. And therefore, it is that constantly involves in desire and constantly produces the experience of, produces the clinging to the appearance of phenomenal existence, produces the clinging to things and ideas and concepts. And according to the Buddha, that clinging comes about due to desire, and desire is the cause of all suffering. And that desire is actually the child of the belief in self-nature as being solid and real. The idea being that if we were not clinging to the idea of self-nature, there would be nothing with which to desire. Interestingly, according to the Buddha's teachings, the very five senses that we think we can determine and explore our environment by are actually extensions of the ego. How are they formed? How do they come about? If you think about the perceptions of the five senses, they are all involved in relativity. For instance, I pick up this glass, and the glass is small. Small relative to what? Small relative to me. If I were an ant, this glass would be very big, phenomenally big. The liquid in this glass is wet. Wet according to what? Wet according to me. I'm dry. But if I were a jellyfish, perhaps the liquid in this glass would seem very much the same as I am, and I wouldn't be able to know wetness in that way. The liquid in this glass is cold. Cold compared to me because I'm a warm-blooded animal. But what if I were a lizard and it were November? The liquid in this glass might not be understood as being cold. It might be the same as me. So these perceptual experiences are actually extensions of ego clinging, actually, of the ego state. Everything that we see, every single thing. And therefore, all of the exaggerations and conceptualizations that we create due to that kind of perception also occurs because of the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Now, back to the idea that we're presenting. If we examine that, that actually means that every single thread of experience that we have ever had, every single one, is an experience of relativity. It begins with the assumption of self-nature. It begins with the need to distinguish self from other. And it continues with a process of conceptualization and exaggeration based on that primal assumption. So that even these thoughts that we're so proud of and that we even go to school to learn how to develop are merely, if you examine them in that way, exaggerations of this foundational assumption of self-nature as being inherently real. This intellect that we are so proud of when we can argue with people and have our philosophical ideas, even that wonderful guru that we, our best friend, we find to be a deluded process. Think of it, a deluded process. Because it begins with an erroneous supposition. A supposition in which we are not aware of the primordial wisdom nature, do not know our Buddhahood, but believe in the inherent reality of self-nature, whether we believe it to be just a physical body and the way that we see, or whether we believe that we are something like a higher self that is still self-nature. And we do not know that uncontrived, luminous, primordial mind. So, what we have to examine then is whether or not it is beneficial to continue to revolve in this process that is based on the idea of self-nature as being inherently real. According to the Buddhist teaching, and the reason why I keep referring to the Buddhist teaching is not only because I myself am a Buddhist, but also because I use the Buddha as an example of someone who has crossed the ocean of cyclic existence, who has attained Buddhahood. I would never quote, as a qualified teacher on this matter, someone who has not. You see, because that would be stupid. That would be someone trying to, me trying to tell you what an orange tastes like, and I would be giving you the words of someone who has never tasted one. That would be pretty stupid. You can see where that would fall apart. So I use the teachings of the Buddha as someone who has attained that Buddhahood and who has attained that state of awakening that is to say, awakened to the true nature, who attained nirvana. Having attained nirvana, the Buddha teaches us that upon awakening to that state called Buddhahood, which is the true nature, which is the uncontrived primordial view, we no longer have the building blocks with which we construct suffering in any form. In order to construct suffering, one has to have a solid foundation in self-nature, because only the ego can suffer. If there is no ego, there is no sense of suffering. Only the ego can accomplish that great feat. And if one is awakened to the primordial wisdom state, if one abides spontaneously in that clear, luminous, uncontrived nature, effortlessly and balanced, there is no cause and effect relationships in the sense of relationship between self and other continually occurring that can bring about the means by which discomfort and suffering can be experienced. In fact, if one were to truly abide spontaneously in that primordial wisdom state, the compulsion to continue within the realm of cyclic existence would be spontaneously liberated. Because there is not a desire to bring us back again and again and again. There are those who have attained that state of liberation, and balancing on the edge of that state of liberation, continue with compassion to enter into the world in order to help others to attain that state of liberation also. But they do not suffer in the way that sentient beings that are caught suffer. There is a difference there. The experience is freer, different in density, like the difference between cement and gossamer thin chiffon fabric. Like that difference. One is much heavier, much weightier. If we determine for ourselves that cyclic existence is faulted due to the fact that it is based on a foundational concept that is a deluded concept, that is erroneous, and due to the fact that it is not based on clear view of the natural primordial wisdom state, then we have to assume for ourselves that we wish to put aside or to abandon those things that continue us in cyclic existence, and to gather together to hold to us those things that produce the great, extraordinary benefit of enlightenment. And having determined for ourselves that, then we must determine what they are. Of course, at that time, one would come to the conclusion that one should follow a path that has already produced the desired results. If one had determined that one wished to set aside those things that continue the wandering in cyclic existence, and that one wished to achieve realization, one would not, therefore, go to, let's say, a psychologist and say, I would like to be analyzed, thinking that that would be a way to do that, because the psychologist is not a Buddha. He did not achieve the ultimate results. He cannot provide the method in that way. He can do something, but he can do something within the context of relative experience. And it's not to say that you should not take advantage of such an opportunity. I'm only saying that does not produce that particular result, and you should be able to distinguish between one result and another. Perhaps what one would do is to find a method that has consistently proved to produce the auspicious result, the proper result, and to follow that method. Having moved oneself in that direction and having taken oneself into that kind of understanding, that which I've just described, one then has a very important step to make. And this is a very important step to make. I wouldn't say it's more important than determining the faults of cyclic existence. I wouldn't say it's more important than determining that one wished to achieve enlightenment. And I wouldn't say it was more important than determining what an effective method or path might be, and to determine that one has found a pure path that has produced the results. But this particular step is extremely important in that it may be the very hardest one to do. And it may be the most subtle process that one has to go by. One can follow very exacting guidelines to determine the benefits of enlightenment. One can look at the Buddha's teachings for that. One can look at the Buddha's teachings about cyclic existence and determine from oneself very easily that this is a faulted reality that we are revolving in. And one can examine whether or not a path over a long period of time has produced enlightenment by looking at the results of the students and teachers that have followed it before you. You should look at the lineage. You should look at the lineage and examine it. That's very cut and dry. You can do that. You can research that and you can do that. But the process that I'm talking about is more subtle. It's more difficult. And this process is one of examining one's own mind, examining one's own perceptions and one's own processes. In our tradition, there are practices that will help to align that ability and that will help one to purify one's perception, to attain pure view. There are processes in which one, for instance, practices devotion. And devotion is a process in which one puts aside the clinging to one's own ideas, especially realizing that they have not brought one to enlightenment so far. And determining a valid object of refuge, one takes those ideas as one's own. But what is hard to come by is something like an inner gyroscope that can remind us continually of how we're really doing and can keep us on track, balanced and on track and always pointing up. Because the habit tendencies that we are involved in and the perceptions that we are involved in are part of that diluted and divided relative perceptual process that is based on the erroneous idea of self-nature. And it's always kind of topsy-turvy. You cannot go by your environment and see how things are straight and how they're not. If our very five senses that cause us to walk through the room without bumping into things are also at fault here and cannot be trusted because they only tell us relativity based on self-nature, on the view of self-nature, then how are we to care for ourselves? How are we to move through our lives? How are we to understand and to know which way is up? So many times, and I know this is true for you, so many times my mind has told me a thing is a certain way. And my mind has told me that because I can see it with my own true eyes. And yet upon studying the Buddhist teaching, I have learned that just two eyes can be very deceptive. And upon watching myself, I can see how obvious that is. Haven't you ever noticed that your own two eyes will tell you something on Thursday, and on Friday they will tell you something completely different about the very same thing? And it really depends on what your mood is? Now that's deluded. What are you supposed to do with that? The first thing that you're supposed to do, and this is the thing that I'm talking about as being the subtle but very important process that you must commit to, really, and engage in, that is to realize from the depth of your heart that every single thread of experience that you are now having, especially your reactions to things, and you use those so much as a guide. We all do, don't we? Our reactions to things, our perceptions about things, our hearing and our sight, our conclusions that we draw after great, long, effortful sessions of thinking and feeling, those very conclusions are questionable. Not only questionable, but the moment one has a feeling, the moment one has a perception, one should immediately assume that that perception and that feeling will change very quickly. And you should not hook into it in the same way that people hook into things when they just change their lives due to a reaction. But we should realize that these perceptions and feelings are impermanent. They not only change from day to day, they change from moment to moment. And depending on what you're experiencing, they could change from second to second. I mean, I've had the very experience of someone coming in here to talk to me and they are set. They have an opinion. And it's very firm, and it's making them very angry. And it's very up there, and it's very preventing them from practicing. And it's very involved. And they have a million good reasons for having that feeling. They can lay them all out for you like food on a table, a real smorgasbord of mental activity. And they can say, well, teacher, what do you think? And I will lay out the very same situation with a different perceptual process, with a different view. And all of a sudden, the thing goes, whoosh, kind of like a pancake that flipped right over. And the very same people that were very angry, very involved, very sure of themselves, and very much about to change their lives due to all of this, suddenly are very different. What made the difference? Something affected their perception. Something caused them to view differently. What is it that we have to do to help ourselves not engage so tightly as we do? Well, in one way, we have to lighten up. We really have to take as a first step the assumption that the true goal is to experience the primordial wisdom nature and to abide spontaneously in that nature, enlightenment. Having accepted that, we really have to look at the perceptual process involved in cyclic existence, to look at its basis and to look at its result. It always produces impermanence, temporary happiness, and suffering. And having produced that and being so changeable, it simply isn't to be trusted. And we have to realize that the entire process of cyclic existence is a perceptual process, and that that perception begins and concludes with our own relative mind. And because of that, we have to realize that our view is distorted which is that our trouble, whatever it might be, begins and ends with us. So hard to look at. Everyone that comes to see me, they'll say, I know everything comes from mind, but here's my problem, and there's the reason over there. Why can't we own that? So hard to do. And on this path, it is the most courageous thing that you can do. And hardly anyone can do it. Hardly anyone, even the best practitioners. Even the best practitioners. It's as though you have to view everything that happens to you and causes you to suffer, everything that brings you discomfort, as an obstacle to your practice, rather than a solid event that occurred because of that thing out there. Viewing it in that way, you can use practice to overcome it by purifying your own perception. And the need is to realize that it is your perception that needs the purifying. And it's so hard to do because when you're suffering, it's much easier to suffer because of something else. Because then you can suffer in such a way that you can get sympathy, and you can suffer in such a way that you can perhaps look for some short-term relief. Like, if this thing is hurting me, I'm going to move it away. That kind of thing. And yet, while that might change the scene, it doesn't produce the ultimate result. Because the building blocks of suffering are still there. The ultimate result is brought about by realizing in truth and finally that all of your experience begins and ends with your own perception, with your own mind. I had an interesting conversation with a friend that may serve as an illustration with this. This friend said, why is it that other people's opinions should matter to us so much? Isn't it true that we should form opinions about ourselves just on our own, that we should just think what we want to be and just keep that opinion and not care what other people think? Well, that's a great theory, isn't it? Why doesn't it work? Because from the time we're very small children, we are engaged in a process of learning, and that process of learning is about perception. And it continues, really, throughout the course of our lives. Without learning how to perceive, if you looked in the mirror, if this were possible, I know it's not possible, but if you had never learned how to perceive, and you looked in the mirror, let's say you were in a coma your whole life, and you grew up to be 20 while you were in a coma, and then looked in the mirror for the first time, first of all, you wouldn't get what was happening. You wouldn't understand that your reflection was in the mirror. You wouldn't know that that was you. How would you know that? You would see this thing, and maybe you would learn to recognize some light and dark and some form and some color. But even when you did understand that that was you, it would look like meat. What is it? It's not the seeing that changes everything. In the same way that it really isn't even the recognition of self that is the problem. But it is the process of perception and the conceptualization that goes along with that that is the problem. In the sense that what we have learned in all of our years on this earth is we have learned how to interpret what's in the mirror. And we have learned by people's reactions to us. If people treat us as something precious and beautiful, when we look in the mirror, we will understand that that thing is precious and beautiful. And we will see something different than the child, for instance, who was abused or who was taught that he was no good. That child will look in the mirror and see something very different. It will see a horror. It will see something that always consistently produces bad reaction in others. And it will interpret that picture in a certain way. And in the case of our involvement with cyclic existence, it's the same in that it isn't really the idea of self that causes suffering. The Buddha understood that he was walking on the earth. The Buddha was not known to walk into walls. He might have walked through a few, but he wasn't known to crash into things, forgetting that he was there. It is the conceptualization process that is involved with that assumption that continues because of that assumption. That is the problem, and these are the building blocks of suffering. And it is that which we must examine and make a commitment to purify. There are no exceptions. Every single event that we have experienced is a perceptual event. And every single perceptual event, every little thread of it, begins and ends with our minds. How should we treat this? Well, we shouldn't walk around like bliss nitties, ignoring everything. That would be stupid. If you want to prove that you shouldn't do that, walk out into Wisconsin Avenue during rush hour. And you will find that your experience in cyclic existence for this round could be ended or changed radically. So you have to pay attention, folks. It's not like you should walk around thinking wonderful thoughts. It's not like that. But you should have the courage to realize that everything that you experience is only a perceptual dance. And that if it looks like suffering to you, what you're really looking into is the karma and the movement of your own mind. You're looking at the dance of your own relative perception. You have to work at it by burning the candle at both ends. You have to stay off of Wisconsin Avenue unless you look both ways and cross at the light. I mean, be sensible. But you also have to realize that every single bit of your experience, whether it's cars rushing at you or whether it's smog on Wisconsin Avenue or whatever it happens to be that looks like it's a problem out there, is actually a reflection of the content and the habitual tendencies and the diluted perceptual process of your own mind, and recognized it as such, you have the power to engage in a path that can change all of that. If this is what's happening to you, then you're in control and the ball is in your court. If all of your experience is a perceptual process, and there is a method by which to purify your perceptual experience, then you have that power. Nothing is happening to you in the sense that there is some real external phenomena that is imposing itself on you who are separate from it. If this were not true, it would not be possible to attain Buddhahood. And the Buddha himself has taught us that we all have the power and the responsibility to attain Buddhahood completely. These are the teachings. It's not about being good or bad or about following instructions. It's not about being tested or handling what comes to you or being competent, or what are those labels we put on what we do? It's about your being in nature the Buddha, but not yet being awakened to that. It's about your continual revolution in this diluted perceptual process and the need for you to awaken yourself to your own true nature. It's about you having that power, because that is your nature and this is your perception. No one can take that away from you, and no one can bestow it on you. In order to act on that power, you have to be courageous and you have to be true to yourself. The very hardest thing to do is to examine your mind in order to be able to do that. But if you play games with you. And if you try to take shortcuts, it's you that you're monkeying with. If there is a method and you short-circuit it, then it is you who pays the price. And it is also you who cannot come to the point of realization at which you can then be of benefit to other sentient beings who are also suffering and who do not yet know a method. So you should think about this and weigh it heavily. And when you're alone, be true to yourself. Watch what you do. Do not let hatred, greed, ignorance reside within your mind. Don't think that there's ever a proper time for it, because it never, ever produces good result. For the optimum result, you must engage in the optimum behavior: generosity, meditation, contemplation, recitation, kindness, study. These things will produce the best result.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and Happy New Year to everyone. I hope this new year turns out to be fabulous for everybody. This teaching of Jetsunma's, it was given back in 1990, and it goes in a whole series. There's a whole lot of these where she talks about the mind as the guru, as the supreme source of refuge. All of them seem to have different topics and seem to have different focuses, like she was saying in the beginning, but I hope you enjoy all of them, well, as well as the others. This was your Wednesday at 7:30 teaching by Jetsunma on YouTube, and we also do them Sundays at 11 a.m. So hopefully you can see them at one of those times, and or just find them in on YouTube, where they have been, where they're all still sitting. Organized, not so much, but soon, we hope. In any case, we also have a meditation led by one of our nuns on Saturdays and Sundays, also on YouTube at 10 a.m. We offer a Medicine Buddha on Facebook at 7 p.m. every evening. It's a short Medicine Buddha, it's condensed, was brought forth by Jetsunma in the time of COVID to, provide an antidote and something that everyone could do to be part of that antidote. So it has been very effective, and people join in, and you can have some support in your grief and get some support and prayers for those that you want them for. So join us there on Facebook. Every day here at the temple, we have a offering ceremony, feast offering, they sometimes call it, called soak. It's on Zoom, It's Monday through Friday at 5:30, Saturdays at noon, and Sundays at 2. And it is uh, available. You can find out where and how to get there by going on tara.org, our website, which is in the chat, and going to the drop down on the, I think it's the second across from the left on the main menu. Drop down to Meditate, Pray, Study, and click on the first one, which is Webcasts and Calendar. And that calendar will give you everything that you need of what we're doing. You click on the event and it will tell you how to get there. It'll tell you any passwords you need, and it will also give you the text. So we hope you join us. For these practices, we like to make it available for everyone, and we certainly appreciate your coming along. For the next few weeks still, until the 22nd of January, we are doing, in addition, a Chinrezi, Sur, and 100 deity practice, which is traditionally done for those who have passed away and are still in the bardo, which is why there's a kind of a deadline date there. We do it for the 7 weeks that people are in the bardo. This one is particularly done for one of our monks who passed away in December, and we're doing it on the same day that he passed, so it's on a Sunday, and it's at 12:30 p.m. on Sundays, also on Zoom. You can find it in the same place. So if doing that practice is something you want to join us in, please do. So that's kind of the run through for weekdays. We do have an additional Medicine Buddha practice coming up tomorrow evening at 7:30. And it is also going to be on Zoom, and the practice is online. And we hope that you, if you wish to join us, it is for all those people that seem to be getting sick right around now. And Jetsunma just said, I'm getting too many calls. Can you guys all do a practice too? You know, so there we are, and happy to help. If anyone would like to make an offering to Jetsunma on the occasion of receiving a teaching, or just to make an offering to her, you're always welcome to do that. It goes directly to her. Her PayPal address for her gifts is jetsunmagift@gmail.com, and that's also in the chat. So please, do that if that appeals to you. Otherwise, in either case, I guess I should say, we'll see you soon. We hope you stay safe. We hope you're in an area that isn't getting bombarded with terrible weather, and have a wonderful week or a few days. We'll see you soon. And take care of yourselves. Be safe. Have a great new year.